For 65 years, a remarkable story of survival has remained largely unheard. In 1945, 300 orphans of the Nazi concentration camps arrived in Windermere, in the Lake District. Again and again, they had defied the odds, surviving the ghettos, the extermination camps, and the death marches across frozen Europe. At the end of the war, they had faced liberation alone, with nowhere to go. Surprisingly, Windermere proved to be their promised land. Now, 4 of those orphans have agreed to share this incredible story for the first time on television.
Couldn't grasp it. From like hell to paradise.
Windermere, that was a miracle.
I shouldn't be here now.
The legacy of the boys is the legacy of hope.
During World War II, the Nazis decided to press ahead with their final solution to wipe out the Jews of Europe. In 1941, SS guards in occupied Poland were authorised to begin a ruthless and systematic policy to kill an estimated 2 million Jewish people. Many were shot where they lived. The rest were marched to purpose-built extermination camps. This is the story of 4 young Polish Jews, now in their 80s, and their remarkable escape. In the days prior to the war, Arik Hirsch was just 10, growing up in a Polish army garrison town. At 12, Minia J was the youngest of 7 children. They lived in a large farmhouse built by Minia's grandparents. Ben Helfgott was 9 and living close to Lodz in central Poland. And Jack Eisenberg, who was 11, lived with his younger brother in Stashov. Within a few years, each of their local Jewish communities would be all but wiped out. By November 1942, the rumours were rife in Jack's town, long before the Nazis arrived. And so, aged just 13, Jack chose to leave his parents.
My father, listen, you see fate. My father says to me, Jack, the uncle, he says if we go together, we may all die together. He had already ideas what's happening. I didn't understand nothing. All I understood that there is danger, we got to go into hiding. And I was a bit excited to go with my cousins, with my uncles, into hiding. And I say, I'm going to the hiding, Dad. I go left, they go right.
Many in Jack's village were shot. The rest were marched to their deaths in a concentration camp. The Nazis also came to Minia's town.
4 o'clock in the morning, they all came. They came with dogs, with rifles. Rouse, rouse, everybody rouse. They were make us run to the square. And then they came next to me and I was taken out. I said, I didn't want to go. Where am I going? I'll stay with my mother. I don't want to go. I went a few steps. I wanted to give her another hug, another kiss. And so she pushes me. Go, go. She always said, go, go, go. And that was 3 times like that. And in the end, she just wouldn't have it. I had to.
Minia never saw her parents again. Instead, she was taken to work in a ghetto and then on to Auschwitz, Birkenau. Here, the Nazis selected only the fittest as forced labour. The rest were sent to their deaths. Minia had been reunited with her sister. Together, they faced selection by the Nazi doctor, Mengele. By now, Minia looked sickly and thin.
And now they're making selection to send either to work, or the ones that are not going to work, we're going to the crematorium. Because there were only two ways with Mengele. He noticed something's not right with it. So now he separated me from this sister. I knew that she was being sent to work, but where am I going to send if I'm not good for work? There's only another way.
Minia waited for certain death. But there was a delay as the Nazis waited for a new transport of Jews to arrive and make up the numbers.
They let us stand there for hours until already it was getting dusk. And they opened the gate and they let us in to go back to the block. They were not going to do the crematorium for a few girls.
Several weeks passed, and for a second time, Minia failed to be selected for work. Incredibly, a transport again failed to turn up. Several more weeks, and Minia was up for a third selection. By now, she knew to survive, she had to get across a division separating her from those who had been selected for work. But her height made it difficult to get there unnoticed.
I was moving, watching everybody to get to that division. And being a tall girl, I was a tall girl, I went over the division and I kneeled down. To be like that is not being selected. And then I started going to the door, said, I'll try. It was in my mind. It was something which occurred to me suddenly, you know, and I got through. So really it was the third time I also wasn't selected. So I thought, I will never come out of here. How will I come out? I had to try. If they kill me, they kill me. But at least I will try. And I tried, and I got out.
Instinct, alertness, luck. It was a theme repeated again and again. Other orphans followed to Auschwitz. It was a split-second decision that saved Eric Hirsch.
I noticed the people which were selected were fitter people, younger people, and I thought, I don't want to go with older people and children. It's not a good omen. They tried to take a child away from her mother, and she started screaming. All the assessment run towards her. I walked over to the right-hand side, and another boy followed me. And we walked on, and all the 183 went straight to their death, to be gassed in Birkenau, Auschwitz.
For fit teenage orphans like Arik, the odds of escaping the death queues were better than for the younger children. Most were sent to their deaths. But now, they had to survive the brutality of the work. By 1944, Jack Eisenberg had been caught by the Nazis and forced to work in the shadow of Colditz Castle.
Before the war, Colditz was a famous porcelain factory, and they converted it in the war, towards the end of the war, into an ammunition factory. So I became a builder's mate. There was no choice. Either you're going to be beaten to death, or shot, or you do whatever you can to save yourself.
They were working on the railway line towards Russia. I got a job bringing water into the camp, and the beatings were horrendous, and the conditions were unbelievable.
Every morning they took you out, encountered by a Nazi officer, sneering at us. I'm standing there in a pyjama, stripy suit, that's all, in the cold, barefooted on ice. If I was a sick man, old, I would have been gone.
Staying alive was all the more difficult because there was so little food. Finding something to eat was a daily trial of their physical and mental reserves.
When the drivers went into the canteen for a break, the German drivers, I jumped on the lorry and pinched the food. If they caught me, I would have been shot.
We were almost demented from hunger, knowing that you're not going to get anything better day after day. The day was long, the night was long.
Food overrode everything. I didn't help anybody else. I don't feel ashamed of it. Do you understand? Or guilty. It was survival.
Against the odds, Jack, Ben, Arik and Minya did survive the extermination camps. And by 1945, the end of the war was nearing. A ray of hope. Instead, a new danger threatened to engulf the orphans.
Suddenly they woke us up 4 o'clock in the morning, and we all went in an open train.
We were packed in the train. Some were 80, some were 70, some were 100. We were just packed.
As the Allies closed in on Germany, the Nazis began to move their labour force deep into Nazi territories, away from the front line. They sometimes left just days ahead of the Allies. So instead of being liberated, the captives endured one of the final atrocities of the Holocaust.
We started off in the morning and travelled all day. We travelled the whole night, and in the morning we were again the same place where we started.
Many of the railway lines were bombed, and so the train had to go backwards and forwards and this place and this way, and so we weren't moving very fast.
No sleeping. We had to stand up in the beginning, and then as people died off, we could sit down.
While some were trapped on trains, others, like Jack, set out on a brutal march over 100 miles across Germany.
If you couldn't walk, you know, older people, sick, you were shot, thrown into the ditch. It should have some effect on you. No. All you are concerned that you can march, you've got to march, otherwise you'll be shot.
Food had always been in short supply. Now, there was none.
After a week, we stopped one night at a bombed engineering works. So the first thing we do, start looking for food. I found, listen, a pea, a little pea, like that. Dried out, shrunk. I found food. I'm going to boil it. And I can see around me dozens of eyes coming out from I'm laughing from the sockets. But I'm concerned, what happens if they attack me? I stop, I decide I'm going to eat it. I split it in 4 portions, so it should last longer. 1, 2, 3 minutes, it's gone, isn't it? I'm back to square one, hungry.
600 set out from Colditz. After 2 weeks, only 60 remained. The 4 orphans had again beaten the odds to survive. What they didn't know was that they were all heading for a unique ghetto camp in Czechoslovakia, Theresienstadt. This is a Nazi propaganda film about the ghetto. They hope to fool the world about the true horror of the conditions here. There were rumours that everyone would be killed. For Minja, who had probably had tuberculosis for some time, the end looked inevitable.
When we arrived in Theresienstadt, I collapsed. And they had to take me on stretchers. And everybody thought I'm dying because I was gushing out with blood from my lung.
The orphans had lived through so much. No one could be expected to hold out much longer.
I had no stomach, just skin and bone. I think another day I would have been dead. I knew I'm dying, and I didn't care.
Hostilities will end officially at 1 minute after midnight tonight.
Then, in May 1945, just a few weeks after they'd arrived at the camp, came the news. The war in Europe was over. It was Russian troops that liberated Theresienstadt.
I can hear tanks and Russian music, accordions. You know, the Russians, they like the accordion. I'm liberated.
But for the orphans, the struggle to make a life continued.
So we are free. Where do we go? I'm only 16.
Some tried to return home to Poland. Others joined groups heading for Palestine. The rest remained in Theresienstadt, which had been taken over by the Red Cross.
It took at least 2 to 3 months to get my face better in my body, to get some flesh on my body and so on.
But then, during the first months after liberation, an opportunity of a new life presented itself to the orphans. British Jews wanted to help survivors of the Holocaust. They persuaded the British government to take up to 1,000 orphans.
I knew a little bit about England, the double-deckers, we couldn't understand. The police with the helmets. And it had a good name.
The British consul came, looked us over. Those which were still ill went to a sanatorium, and the rest, he decided to let us in as students into England.
Minja was hoping for a new life in England too, but she was still being treated for tuberculosis. There seemed to be little chance of being chosen.
2 men look at me. You must get a certificate, a proper certificate from the doctor that you can travel, that you are infectious-free. So when I came back, you can imagine the doctor, he didn't know what to do about it. And how can he write down something was infection-free when I've got a terrible infection?
Minja was being cared for by a doctor who was also a survivor of the camps.
Passed another good few weeks, and now the list was closing up. And he was afraid that I won't be able to be put on the list anymore. Then he came, and he gave me a certificate to say that I can travel, that I'm all right. Can you imagine that? To take a doctor, to take it upon himself.
Minja had managed to join the first 300 children bound for Britain. But there was still the small matter of how to get them there. With Europe's transport networks bombed during the war, the British Air Force stepped in.
The Sterling bombers came, 10 of them, and they put 30 children on each bomber.
There was a film taken, and I see myself for a second walking into the plane. An English chap says, don't press this button, because this is the hatch for the bombing. If you press that button, you'll go through.
Suddenly the pilot comes and brings us a piece of chocolate. Ah, we've never seen chocolate for 7 years.
The Nazis had first robbed Jack, Minya, Ben and Arik of their parents, then forced them to endure a living hell. Now, they flew to a new life in Britain. In the Lake District, they found a ready-made site where the orphans could recover. It was thought rural areas were best for recuperation. On the banks of Windermere, there was a former housing estate built for workers of a wartime aircraft factory. There was even a local community of Jewish refugees ready to care for the young survivors.
We never seen this like that, those houses with the front gardens and back gardens, so beautifully kept. And there is this gentleman in the front garden, and he greets me, and good morning, what a beautiful day. And it was a beautiful day. Oh, it was wonderful.
The group now had to adjust to life in England.
The first thing issued to us, underwear. But the suits, the shirts didn't come yet. So what's happening? We are sitting in these chalets waiting to be able to go out. And it's raining. Next day, come down in buckets. We're getting impatient. And we walk out in our underwear in the rain. And the people look at us like, what kind of fellows is that?
We went for a walk. Sometimes the boys would take a boat and we would go on the lake. It was wonderful.
I wanted to go in. That was too cold. And the place was absolutely fantastic. Mountains and fantastic.
Some boys, not me, start looking around the neighborhood. Had every garage, had a bicycle. Well, we don't ask questions. So, not only in the underwear, in raining, pinching the bikes.
The effect of the Nazi camps showed itself in different ways. Mealtimes were key moments in the Windermere day.
We are hungry all the time. We want to eat. And whenever they brought the bread, was never enough. The boys were putting it in here. They thought they'll not get, they never get any bread anymore.
And you had like 20 on a table. And they start bringing in the plates of food. The people on the bottom end, as soon as they get first plate, take the second plate into the first plate. And say, make a big plate. So in other words, a half a table didn't have any food.
Years in the camps had taken a physical toll.
They took us to the doctors, the dentist. But I'm telling you, many girls came back very unhappy because from this concentration camp, one girl had all the front teeth, she had to be taken out all the teeth. They were all rotten.
The frail bodies of the orphans began to heal, but there were other effects of the Nazi camps that proved much harder to treat.
We were happy. We were together. We were free. We were running around, playing volleyball, football. We had everything. It was an exciting time. But when we went to sleep, it was a different story. We were thinking what happened, that we were alive, what's going to happen to us, and so on. So we lived two lives actually at the time.
We had a lot of problems on our minds. How can you go through things like that from the age of 11 and to come up scot-free was impossible.
We never talked about the concentration camp. We know what we've gone through. We've been there, you understand? But we would talk about who you lost, family.
At the start of 1946, the orphans left Windermere and moved on to cities around Britain and beyond. What few could have realised was just how successful their lives would turn out to be. Jack built up a business manufacturing luggage before getting married and settling in Manchester. Minia married a man who worked in the fashion industry. For many years, they lived in Milan, in Italy. In 1956, as British lightweight champion, Ben represented Britain in the Melbourne Olympic Games. For years, Arik felt unable to share his story. In the 1990s, he finally wrote a book and now spends his time telling young people about the Holocaust. 65 years ago, only a couple of local newspapers covered the story. The BBC wanted to film, but the orphans' carers decided against it.
We see bikes.
So the story of how 300 orphans of the Nazi concentration camps came to Windermere remained largely unknown.
Also came over as a teacher.
Now all that is changing, and today they are supporting the launch of a new website to tell their Windermere story.
This one.
When I see my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, how is that possible that I am a survivor and Hitler and Mengele are dead? This is what I am thinking. Because I don't know how I've done it, but this is what I'm thinking.
I don't know to this day how I got away each time from death. Our town had 5,000 Jews before the war. Only 40 came out alive.
The legacy of the boys is the legacy of hope. That no matter what happened to people, no matter what harm was done to them, there is no room for hatred. That people should learn to live together, should not seek revenge.
When I go to a supermarket, I always stop at the frozen peas because I can buy the whole freezer and have it. Do you understand? The change of circumstance or look in life. I'm reliving 65 years back. And as a matter of fact, it's not my favorite food up here.